Welcome everybody to the ASAPM 2010 Dialogue Series. My name is Alex Brown. I'm with Real Life Projects, Inc., and I am very, very happy to be helping ASAPM host this. Let me turn this over to Tim, Project Manager of this aPRO project. Please take it from here.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex. First of all, I want to thank you, Alex, for sponsoring this. For all of the participants coming on, Alex Brown is the CEO of Real Life Projects Incorporated, and has graciously allowed us to use his functionality for the ASAPM Dialogue Series. Just a word about this Dialogue Series. This is intended as a program for ASAPM members and others who are interested in these topics, who might soon become members, to participate and engage in a discussion of various topics. So this month we're talking about aPRO. Next month we will be talking about definitions of project success. And so we hope to engage a lot of folks. We hope that you will return. We'll give you more information about that a little bit later. So that being said, let me introduce myself and my co-presenter. My name is Tim Jaques. I am the CEO of a company called Line of Sight. My company specializes in project management, methodology development, and improving the performance of organizations. I've been working in this field for about 15 years. I also happen to be on the board of ASAPM. I am the current Director of Standards, and I am also the project manager for the aPRO project. So it's a real pleasure for me to be here. Let me also introduce Dino Eliadis. Dino is president of Dino Eliadis Incorporated. He has 20 years of experience in leading and developing high-performance teams. Dino has an MBA and has also graduated from the Defense Systems Management College for acquisitions and program management. Dino was an integral part of our success on this project. He led the business planning side for aPRO. So there are a lot of other folks who are not going to be hosting this, who were deeply involved in the program, and we will talk about them briefly. So please welcome Dino as well. Hi, Dino.
Thanks, Tim, and welcome everybody at this point. I guess to kind of get started here, what we're really going to be speaking about today is, what can you do when project management really and the performance of projects really counts. The idea of enterprise project management improvement has been a tremendous strategic benefit to organizations over the years, but it hasn't been something that's readily available. Executives are always looking for ways to kind of leverage opportunities or to solve problems that stand between them and reaching their goals. And this is one way to really kind of to begin to kind of move forward with that. So,
let me add to that just a quick history here of aPRO before we jump into it, just for everyone's sort of edification. So aPRO is really, just as kind of a high-level definition, aPRO is a new service offering or product, it's sort of both, that deals with organizational performance and project management. And it really asks a very basic question. That is an organization competent in project management? And we do this, we attempt to understand an organization's level of competency by looking at the elements of competency and the underlying performance indicators. This approach came about from a gentleman named Bill Duncan, who is also a member of ASAPM and has been a long time and somewhat renowned player in the project management field. He had these sort of nascent ideas, and these ultimately culminated into the aPRO project. So just very quickly, here's kind of what we did when we walked through. over the last year and a half. aPRO was formed in February 2009. There was a team of about 8 or so folks who formed the core team of aPRO. And we met virtually every other week and got together twice in the development of this project, once in Colorado Springs and once in Los Angeles. And when we met, we had sort of extended working sessions to go through the content. At the beginning of this project, we identified several major deliverables. Those deliverables were a working standard for project competency, for organizational performance competency, an assessment guide, a business plan, and training content. We have engaged in formal reviews of these deliverables. Most notably was the standard itself. This deliverable was reviewed in between December and February by more than 200 people worldwide, and substantial changes were made to the standard based on those reviews. Today marks an important day for ASAPM. The standard was released on February 5th, 2010, and is available for your download free of charge today from the website, and we'll give you that link later. Hopefully everybody has a copy of it. We are now in the process of rolling out the final products. That includes the Assessor's Guide and the training content, etc. And so as we move forward through this presentation, we'll sort of talk to you about these various deliverables and tell you how all these things work together to form aPRO. So let me turn it back to you, Dino.
The basis of this really kind of gets down to, what if your new products and service offerings were available when they were promised on a regular and consistent basis? Additionally, if cost reduction initiatives, because these things are going on all over organizations all the time, overran their budgets. When you set your mind upon an operational improvement to be implemented, how can you implement those things with less risk? And like I said, in many organizations, you've got all of this stuff kind of going on at the same time, and how the results of all of these things are kind of scattered all over the place. From here, really what you want to do is there's a common thread really that runs through all of these initiatives. And in a lot of cases, people don't really realize that there is a common thread. So that common thread, really what it becomes is it's using a single solution, better project management, as a method by which, to have a single solution that impacts all the initiatives across the enterprise. And really project management applies whether it's a major capital initiative or if it's just creating a new expense form for a department or something along those lines. So, I mean, it runs the gamut from something as small as, an expense report being created to all the way up to, a capital, millions of dollars worth of capital improvement kind of projects. And so from here, we really want to look at, why is project management really so important and so critical from a strategic standpoint, not just from a tactical standpoint. And the reason is project management really connects the strategic to the tactical. It's the way that you implement, that an organization implements its strategy. So if you do it, you can make better use of the critical resources that are required across the entire organization, and it's not, everyone always fending for and trying to find, the resources that they need to do things. Sometimes resources are being applied to something that has no strategic value to an organization at all. Again, project management and having a standardized methods that you can utilize across the entire organization allows you to realign your priorities when something either happens internally or externally that impacts the strategy overall. That's probably one of the most difficult things that organizations have, and it's typically because they don't have a way of looking at the strategic level of these things. I mean, we've all seen instances when we've done better planning, or if we've led to greater productivity. Obviously, those things help us to improve productivity overall. And I mean, all these things live this kind of allow themselves to be tied into saving time and money, which is not always the thing that we're looking for, but people are always looking for cost savings and time savings wherever possible. So how do you get there from here? And this is really kind of at the core what aPRO is really all about. It's an efficient approach to obtaining more useful results. And basically you do that by applying effective management across the entire enterprise. aPRO, really, it's an open standard that was created that can be customized to your special need. It doesn't dictate a process, but instead it helps you to look at what are those things that are critical to performance as it relates specifically to high-performance project management organizations. Okay, and finally, it gives you a way to demonstrate competency for your particular customers or shareholders through a third-party recognized comparison as opposed to just saying it for yourself. So at its core, aPRO really is based on like Tim mentioned earlier. It's based on a proven method. This is a method that Bill Duncan has used and with demonstrated results for a long time. So what our project team really did was we applied discipline and created a scalable approach that allows others to kind of replicate the process for themselves and get the results that others have kind of reaped by having Bill come in and do these things for them. Additionally, it provides an organizational certificate or certification. That's a way really that you can kind of publicly be recognized, so that your organization has a way of demonstrating that it meets a certain set standard as things go along. So this is something that's kind of unique to aPRO as well, is that ability to certify your organization as being competent in project management. And so a lot of people would say at this point, yeah, well, so what? What's the big benefit of all of that to me at this point? By getting the certification, it's a way of distinguishing yourself from the crowd. It's a way for you to gain a competitive advantage and really allow you to demonstrate that, but not just because of yourself, but through a third party. Additionally, it's a way, using aPRO, you can also get a strategic, a standardized method for strategic initiatives as well, by creating a system that you can count on delivering consistent results across the enterprise on a regular basis. And so you really kind of got to look at, what's that worth to your organization and being able to do that on an ongoing basis. And so I guess with this, let me turn this back.
The audience, if you have a second.
Sure.
Somebody was asking, can this be done at different levels of the organization, a group, a division? Does it have to be done at an enterprise level?
No, absolutely. I mean, that's a great question, and that was one of the things that we struggled with as we kind of got to the end and began to kind of look at how do we apply this or determine where it's being applied in the organization. And so Tim's going to talk next about the process and how the process is kind of applied. And that's the first step actually in the process, is trying to define what the scope of aPRO as you go in to do that is going to be. Is it going to be within just a department within an organization? Maybe it's just going to be for a specific group. Or maybe it's just within one location, for a multinational company or anything like that. So determining exactly where aPRO is going to be applied is really kind of the first step in the process.
So let's. That's a really great question. Thank you to whomever asked that. Let's jump into those details right now and see if we can't take a shot at answering that. So before we talk specifically about the assessment itself, I think the first place to go is to talk about who's involved in aPRO itself. And as you can see from the slide, there are really three players here. Let's start with what we're calling the candidate organization. That's an organization that is looking to become certified. And so really there are two paths that an organization can take. One path is that an organization decides that it can improve itself. It can use the standard, which is free of charge, to understand where it is deficient and what it needs to do better. The other path that it can take is to actually become certified. And so it would commit to an assessment, and when it looks to do that, the second bullet talks about choosing between a self-assessment and an independent assessment. A self-assessment is what I was speaking of earlier, where an organization can really look at itself. It could actually send somebody to the training and do the assessment for itself. The one thing that it can't do with a self-assessment is become certified, because an organization can't assess itself to be certified. So if an organization is looking to become certified, then it uses an independent assessment and an independent assessor, which brings us to the lower left-hand cloud, which is our group of recognized assessors. These are independent contractors. They are trained and licensed by ASAPM to be recognized assessors, where we have a 2-day training program for recognized assessors. So we see this as an opportunity for folks to build this as part of their business. So for a candidate organization, they can find a local resource, somebody who can come in and do that assessment for them. And for the recognized assessor, there's an opportunity to do those assessments. Finally, the third sort of player in the trifecta here is ASAPM. And the role of ASAPM is to maintain the standard itself, provide the assessor training, and validate the certification. So ASAPM actually delivers the certification to the organizations. So those are the three players, and what we want to do next is to sort of talk about the very heart of aPRO, which is the assessment itself. So what does an assessment look like? Well, one of the things, before we sort of jump into that, I want to just call out some sort of overriding themes here that I think are really important for us to keep in mind. And those themes are simplicity, ease of use, low cost, and an open standard. Dino mentioned open before in an earlier slide. So we're trying to build something here that is accessible, that's easy to use, that is relatively simple, even though in its details there are complexities. The process itself we're trying to keep as simple as possible. So the aPRO process really has three basic steps to it. We determine the scope, we perform the assessment, and we report the results. And this assessment process works both for a self-assessment and for a certification. So let's talk about what each of what those three steps look like. First one is determining the scope, and there we want to first identify the sponsor for the scope, and this is absolutely critical, and particularly as we delve into the murky world of what's the scope of an aPRO assessment, having a sponsor is absolutely critical to that, because the sponsor will be able to remove obstacles and will be able to help clearly define which business units would be included and which would not be included. We want to next identify those units to include. So we want to consider elements like what departments are involved. Are there specific operating units? Does this go by locations or by vertical segments, by product lines, manufacturing lines, etc.? And the idea here, there's a little bit of art to this because we want to have a robust enough process and a robust enough population to be able to certify that the certification actually has some meaning to it for the organization. But we don't necessarily want to have it be too big to be so expansive that the assessment, doesn't necessarily touch on entities that, where an organization might be certified, but it has overseas operations that are included there that were never looked at. So we have to really be clear about what exactly are we talking about. Let me give you an example. Let's use a large manufacturing company that has, locations in Connecticut and Colorado and California and overseas operations in India. And what we might want to do is to look at a particular location to begin with and to focus on one location and to get that location certified initially, and then to maybe roll that certification to the other locations because they're different enough in their operations.
And Tim, we have an interesting question from the audience that could be good here. He said, the question is, how does aPRO connect with other governing disciplines? So what if there's an enterprise architecture in place for part of the company? What if they're using something like CMMI, COBIT, or ITIL? How does aPRO fit into that? Do you consider that for figuring the organizational units and so on?
Sure. I'm glad that came up. I'll give an answer, and then Dino, feel free to jump in. Sure. aPRO absolutely complements every single one of those. And the reason why is because aPRO is not prescriptive in the types of practices that an organization should be undertaking. In other words, aPRO does not say, you need to have this type of strategic plan. You need to have that type of project management practice. All aPRO is saying is you need to have a strategic plan that needs to be communicated out to your stakeholders, to the relevant stakeholders in an effective way. And so it's through the assessment process, through interviews and through surveys, that we determine that. So because the recognition here is that what works for one company doesn't necessarily work for another. So if one company uses COBIT, that's great. That may not work in another environment, and this assessment does not add or deduct, from the equation based on those kinds of management practices.
Yeah,
let me turn this over to you.
I was going to say I'll talk to that one because really my interest in this came from years and years and years and years and years ago. When I was in the Air Force, I actually worked on one of the initial projects that the CMM was actually applied to, and worked very closely with the SEI on that project. I was very impressed with the with the results that came from that. But when I went out on my own and began to consult on my own, one of the things that I found was everything didn't fit into the CMM model. And so I still believe very deeply in the approach that they use, but I always searched for something else. And this was the first time, so I've created over the years, I've created a multitude, and I've applied these in a multitude of different ways, and in different disciplines, not only in project management, but within organizational management, strategic levels within organizations as well. And this is the first time that I've ever really come across anything that wasn't specific and dictated things, and that's why I aligned myself with this and got involved with this from the beginning. So, I like the way that you defined it, Tim, in terms of it's not really prescriptive, because it isn't. What it's doing is it's saying these are the kinds of things that you would see in organizations that demonstrated competency in these areas, and all you're looking for are those things present. It's not, that these things have to be done in this order and you have to follow this type of a process or anything like that. So what you're really evaluating here is you're evaluating results within the organization as opposed to identifying whether or not processes are present or not.
Great.
If that makes sense. So.
Thanks. Thanks. I hope that got to your question. Feel free to ask another one. This is great.
And Tim, I was going to say, if you want to here as well, with determining scope, I'll jump in here. I actually applied this process already to a sizable city here in the Tampa Bay area, in the Tampa Bay market. And what we did was we looked, because there was some certain things that they were trying to achieve, and so the first thing that we looked for sponsors, and the sponsors in this case were the assistant city managers within that particular municipality. And the first question that I asked them was, how many people do we want to include? How sizable do you want? And we identified about a half a dozen departments that they wanted to begin to look at. So we haven't looked at the entire city, but they picked out those departments that project management impacts them the greatest at that particular point. And then from there, we identified who the participants were going to be, and we looked at who were the department managers within each of those, and we talked to at least one project manager within each of those areas, and additionally some resource managers that maybe held some of the resources or controlled some of the resources that would be used and applied on projects as we went through that. And that process took us literally less than a couple of hours to really sit down and really hammer out all of those details in determining what the scope was. So that's how this part of the process has actually been applied, in a real-world situation.
Thanks. So you're really talking to that third step here, Dino, which is identifying the participants. One of the key facets in determining the scope is to understand how big is the population of people that we need to talk to, that a recognized assessor needs to talk to in order to certify the organization. And so in the assessment process, we have developed a tool to understand what's the total population, and then what's an adequate number of folks that we would need to talk to and to get a sense. And then of those people, how many of those people need to answer the questions in a certain way for this to be called a pass. And so all of those details are laid out in the assessor's guide and can be delivered by a recognized assessor. So what's really critical here is identifying who are the executives, the managers, the project managers, and then what kinds of interactions are we going to have with them, face-to-face interviews, surveys, et cetera, to get a feel for, is the organization meeting, is it in fact performing at a level that we would consider competent?
That's Henry. We had a really good follow-on question here. About what percentage of the organization are you typically talking to? Is it 10% of the company, 1% of the company? Can you give any rough guidelines?
We've kind of gone around and around in circles on this one. Really, what it comes down to, it's really dependent on the organization, and in terms of how much of the organization is really focused on project management. So it's in an organization where there's a lot of process kind of things as opposed to projects that are going on. There may be a smaller percentage of the organization that has to be assessed. What it really comes down to is looking at the overall portfolio of all the projects that an organization has, and from that saying, what slice of this are we going to have to really kind of look at to determine whether or not the performance criteria is being met within this organization, and within the different departments that have been identified as being a part of that particular assessment.
I would say, I would add to that probably as a general rule of thumb that 10% is not a bad number to look at. But again, it gets to what Dino is saying in terms of, yeah, right. So what we're trying to do is the reason that we don't have that nailed down is because it really is a matter of understanding the scale and scope of the organization and the project management population therein,
Yep.
and trying to understand how much of that needs to be talked to. Because we want, the point of aPRO is that it's a meaningful certification. That is that if an organization really decides to go down this path, that there is a level of certainty that in fact enough of these practices are being done that the organization truly is competent. Now let's jump into the actual assessment itself. And so what happens in an assessment? Well, underlying these slides is something called an assessor's guide. And that assessor's guide is a document that is provided only to recognized assessors. And so in order to have that, one has to go through the recognized assessor training. In that assessor's guide is a protocol for specific questions that are based on the standard to ask and interview various folks. And really there's two populations that we're looking at, executives and project managers. So when we talk about executives, we're talking about how do you communicate strategic direction to managers and staff? How is a project's value to your organization determined? Right? These kinds of questions, how is a project status communicated to you? We want to understand the underlying processes. All right? And so again, you can see by these questions, we're not being prescriptive here saying, do you get weekly communications? Do you get monthly communications? We're simply asking the question, how is project status communicated to you? We want to understand, is it communicated, and is it communicated effectively? Because, you know, for one organization, a daily update might be warranted. For another, it might be monthly. What is one, and then finally the last question is, what is one change in how projects are managed that you would like to most see? So we really try to engage executives in a dialogue about project management in the organization. The part of the assessment itself then is gathering evidence. We want to see real evidence. So it's not just sitting around with executive staff and project managers telling stories, but it's really about looking at, show me some evidence of your weekly status reports. Show me where you meet. You know, show me evidence of your weekly meetings. Show me evidence of a strategic plan and how it was communicated. So there's a lot of fact-checking that goes on to ensure that an organization actually does what it says it does.
Right.
So
and Tim, to that end too, this is a good, looking at the example that I had provided earlier, one of the things that we knew is in most cases in the Tampa Bay area, most of the cities have a strategic plan. So, you know, to say, you know, that they have and just looking for those things wasn't really good enough. It was, we had to dig and really ask the question to determine how did that information get disseminated to the proper departments so that they knew they were working on the right things and the things that they should. And there, you know, and as we looked at those things, they were, you know, we determined that there was enough communication going on from that perspective in order to disseminate that information. But what we did find was it wasn't being reported back because there wasn't really any channels for how status was communicated back that they were making progress on it. So you can see how, you know, in some ways, you know, information may flow in one direction, but it doesn't flow in the other direction, and you know that's going to be a problem. And so those are the kinds of things that we're looking for with aPRO to determine if those things exist or not.
It sounds like you're talking to all levels of the organization. You're talking about executives on this slide, but you're also talking to project managers and team members. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's great. The next place where Tim's probably going here, I think.
Yep. I see another question. Understood that aPRO is not prescriptive in itself. How does it prescribe steps for improvement, i.e. in transitioning from as is to the should be? How does it inform change management? Does it simply ask prompting questions that help diagnose? To begin to get at that, I think the assessor's guide, what we're really looking at is something called threshold competencies here. And so we'll talk a little bit more about this later on. What we're asking is that an organization provide evidence that it meets 100% of the competencies that we've outlined. In other words, a 70% score on the test does not necessarily pass the test. Now, it gets a little more complicated than that. So, and we can talk about that more a little bit later. But the idea here is that aPRO is not necessarily a prescriptive tool. It does not have levels. So there's no level 1, level 2, level 3. You're either certified as competent or not certified as competent. In those areas where there are deficiencies, the standard itself is prescriptive of the types of practices that would need to be manifested within the organization that would guide the organization forward. So in other words, you might see in one of the areas, well, we're really weak in developing our project managers. We have no plan for how we develop project managers. So that would become clear, and that would be the area to work on. The assessment tool itself is not prescriptive in that. However, a recognized assessor is a good resource for helping to remedy those problems. So as we're going through, so thank you again for that question. Let me sort of advance forward here and talk a little bit more about the assessment, and then we'll jump into the third step, which is reporting results. So we're still in the midst of an assessment. There is the second part of the assessment is interviewing project managers. And this is not necessarily sequential. You know, in a typical assessment, what you might see is an assessor who is going around and talking to different people at different times using a variety of interview and survey techniques to do that. And so in talking to project managers, we want to understand information at a different level, such as how does your current project support your organization's strategic direction? Right? We want to understand, does the project manager see the big picture? If you're managing multiple projects, which is most important and why? And what benefits is your current project expected to deliver? So we want to get a feeling for, are the project managers attuned to the larger environment within which the projects are working? And so in the assessment guide, we're looking at a variety of different questions across all of the areas of competency to understand what, are the project managers, in fact, contributing to the competency of the organization. Okay, so that really, go ahead, Dino.
No, that sounds good.
Okay, so moving ahead, let's look next at reporting the results. So in a self-assessment, an organization can take the results of its assessment and use that as a tool to understand what they need to do to improve themselves. And in fact, what we envision is many organizations may just do self-assessments with or without a recognized assessor for some period of time until they feel they're ready to enter into the certification process. In either case, what they would want to do is align the projects with the strategy, provide executive leadership to the management of projects. So in reporting the results, we want to be able to provide executive leadership to the management. We want to provide adequate resources. We want to develop project management staff and ensure a reliable support structure for the project. So really this is, what we're talking about is getting through the assessment, and you can see as we go through this, it's pretty straightforward. So we're talking about using documents. There's no sort of fancy online tool. We haven't made investments in these kinds of things. What we really want to do is to keep this in a way very accessible to both large and small organizations. Make it relatively easy to use. Let it be applicable across all verticals, all industries, etc. Certification is one of the results of the assessment process. And as we talked about, this is a threshold competency, which means that you only have to satisfy the you have to be, to state it colloquially, you have to be above average, but you don't have to be a star player. What this means is that you have to satisfy 100% of the criteria, but you don't necessarily have to be the absolute star player, #1 company doing this. All that an organization has to do is to have satisfactory evidence for 100% of the performance criteria. And in those areas where it's deficient, it can take steps to remedy those and then become certified. And the certification is valid for 3 years. Moving forward here, when we talk about then the certification is really dealing with the candidate organization. When we talk about the recognized assessor, we are talking about individuals and small consultant companies that can go out there, and even large consulting companies that provide aPRO certification, aPRO assessments as a service offering. And in order to become a recognized assessor, they have to complete an intensive 2-day training program. They have to satisfy the criteria of that training program, which includes an exam and a role play. And at the conclusion of that, assuming that there's a successful path to that, they would get the assessor guide and authorization to be part of the program, and then they would be in the database of recognized assessors. What that means really is that what we're trying to do is to create a cadre of folks who have a similar approach to doing the assessment, who understand what the assessment is all about and the steps that are involved, et cetera. So this represents a really great opportunity for many, many folks to get into this kind of work. Bill Duncan just joined us, and I'd like to invite Bill Duncan to jump in here. We want to talk now about a couple of examples. Bill, your timing was impeccable. We want to talk about how this process works. We have 2 examples. These examples came out of early work of aPRO. So this work came out of sort of some of the earlier nascent forms that aPRO had before we had the assessor guide. But Bill, are you on the line? You want to speak to that?
This was a company that we worked with a couple of years ago. You see the basic outline there on the web, high-tech manufacturing company, good-sized company having problems with their project management, primarily in the area of new product development. They were having a great deal of difficulty delivering products on time. I used an early version of aPRO to do the assessment there, identified a number of changes that needed to be done. One of the primary ones was a revised planning process that included all of the major representatives to the new product development process. In the past, the functional group sales, marketing, engineering, manufacturing typically did their planning independently without too much coordination. One of the recommendations was that the initial plan should include all 3 groups. And the first facilitated planning session ran for almost a week, actually, with about 20 people involved, and the client's own assessment of the cost saving on that particular item was $1 million in combination of cost avoidance for some of the things that they were doing, as well as savings by identifying risks early in the process and by developing approaches to them that were coordinated by all of the folks who were involved. In addition, management went through the active projects that were underway with a focus on the changed business circumstances, and actually decided to cancel 7 of the 52 active projects that they had because while they had made sense when the project started up, they really did not make sense anymore. The environment had changed, technology had changed, market had changed. So those 7 projects were canceled before too much more money was spent on them. And in addition, it freed up the resources from those projects to work on other projects with better returns, made more business sense. So the consulting engineering company, again, you can see the basic characteristics, about 4,500 employees spread out across the world, nearly 100 offices. They undertook the review of their project management practices based upon an analysis of what they called profit erosion. Now, understand when this organization bids on a project, they have an expected amount of money that they are going to make on that project. Obviously, it may be higher or lower based upon their ability to compete, the amount of competition for a particular engagement, their relationship with that client, their expertise in the area, and so on. But for every one of their projects, they had an expected profit, and they tracked the actual profit versus the expected profit. And any reduction in that was considered profit erosion. At the time, they undertook to improve their project management by going through a review. Their profit erosion was approximately twice the published industry averages. And then within the first year after modifying the way they went through planning their projects in preparation for bidding as well as managing the projects, once they had won the engagement, they were actually able to reduce it to below the industry average. First year return was $3 to $5 million. In addition, one of the other big problems that they had was turnover in the project management ranks. Their turnover had been running approximately 30%. Basically what that means is that 1 out of every 3 project managers was leaving for greener pastures each year. One of the key factors in driving that departure was the mandatory overtime, because projects were consistently late and they were working both the project managers and the project teams pretty hard in order to try and meet dates that had been committed without adequate planning. So just the mere act of cutting down on the turnover had a huge impact on their turnover.
Thank you. So here are a couple of examples. Dino gave another example down in the Florida area of ways that this methodology has been applied to real companies, to real organizations facing real challenges and trying to address those through an assessment and taking some steps. So one of the points that we kind of wanted to just come back to here is thinking about these themes, this idea that aPRO is simple. It's a simple approach to dealing with complex subject matter. It is relatively easy. There's no tools to buy into per se, nothing automated, etc. This is really about understanding how an organization functions. It's relatively low cost, and the standard itself is open and free. So those were some of the key points that we wanted to make sure that we talked about today. We wanted to include this quote in here. Comes from a reputable source, actually 2 reputable sources. So the best companies really do have the best project management. It's an investment, and so what we are hoping to bring to the marketplace through aPRO is a way for organizations to work smarter towards reaping the rewards of the best project management.
Sure. If this is something, there's 3, like Tim had mentioned earlier in the presentation, there's really 3 people that really kind of get involved in this. And, if you want to get involved or get your organization certified at this particular point, then, here is the place that you would go. And the idea here is if you want to get your organization certified, then you need to find a recognized assessor. So contact ASAPM at this particular email address, and we can get you a list of assessors, as well as there are a list of assessors on the website as well. If you want to self-assess your organization, we have a number of organizations that have come to us and said, you know, we want to assess ourselves, we want to use this internally, then aPRO.learn is the place to go there. And what you're going to have to do at that point is to get enrolled in training. I believe the first training program is scheduled sometime for later this summer or into the early fall. I'm not sure. Tim, do you remember what the date was on that? I think it's listed out on the website as well.
Yeah, go to the website.
Yeah, and then finally the last one is if you want to become a recognized assessor, then again you got to get trained obviously first, and so aPRO.RA at aSAPM.org is the place that you can go and get in touch with us to find out, or to get in touch with us to get that process started as well, and to get more information.
Fantastic. We're getting down to the last couple of minutes. We want to thank everybody. The standard is available for your use right now as well. The presentation is available for your use. And please contact us at apro-interest@asapm.org. We will get back to you, we promise. So that really concludes the presentation about aPRO. Are there any questions right now?
And actually, guys, just for process point of view, I think if anybody needs to go at this point, feel free to go. We've wrapped up the main part of the session, but a lot of us can stay on to answer questions at this point. So if you do
absolutely.
Hang on, before everybody jumps off, the one thing I do want to recommend is everybody plan to attend July 1st, 2010, 3 p.m., and attend the next dialogue series. We're going to be talking about perspectives on project success. That is, what is project success? Is it meeting your customer requirements? Is it on time, on schedule, on budget? What is it exactly? So please join us July 1st at 3 p.m., same place, online. Thanks so much.
Yeah, and plenty of you aren't members of ASAPM as well. It's a great organization. I encourage everybody to be involved.
Alex, thanks to you for helping us sponsor this. Really appreciate that.
Let's see, we do have a couple of questions here that I think would be useful to get to. Some of them are very concrete. Where does the training take place? And what can you tell us about the 2-day training?
So right now, I will say this. Right now there are no, we don't have a specific date or place for the training. We will soon. And when we do, what we anticipate is probably having a location probably on the East Coast of the United States and a location maybe on the West Coast of the United States, so that we can get folks who are, people don't have to travel quite so far. And what we're looking at is probably in the late summer or early fall time frame for the first training.
Or if somebody wants to put a group of 5 together, we can probably arrange to come to you.
Another question came up earlier was, what does an organization have to do in between recertifications?
No, there's not really anything specific they have to do at that point. Obviously, to keep the certification, they're going to have to conduct another they're going to have to conduct another assessment at that 3-year point at least.
Yeah.
But there isn't anything that's really required at this point in between in that 3-year period in order to actually keep the assessment. Once you've earned it, you've earned it. Keep doing what you're doing, obviously.
One of the things we had discussed and we hadn't finalized is if there is a major change in the organization, that ASAPM would reserve the right to basically cancel the certification. Let's just take as a for instance, if you had an IT department or a new product development department that got assessed and the leadership of that group left for some reason 6 months into the certification process, it would be difficult to expect that that organization would continue to function effectively, basically with its head cut off. So there might be situations like that.
Okay, that's great. And I guess there's one question that came up early that I think would be useful to just hear all your thoughts on. When you're presenting aPRO to an organization, what are some of the issues that you run into just getting buy-in for that? How do you get them to accept this as a maturity level metric and to get serious about making these kinds of changes? Because we all know any sort of change, organizational change, is going to be difficult.
So Alex, they're looking for sales help to present to their clients?
Yeah, I guess because a lot of your examples you've given, you're assuming that people are already on board and interested in doing aPRO. Do you guys have any case studies or any information about what do you do if they're not interested in aPRO yet? How do you get them interested?
I think there are a couple of things in the presentation that people might want to take a look at. Certainly, the results of the McKinsey study might encourage organizations to look at improving their project management. The two case studies that we included, just snippets of, tremendous benefits there, as well as if you look at similar kinds of improvement efforts, everything from the CMMI capability maturity model and other kinds of improvements. For the most part, what you see are significant improvements if the organization is committed. Now, I may be a little bit iconoclastic on this particular point, but I think if you're trying to convince an organization that they should change, presenting them with this kind of information and they don't want to change, that's probably an organization that I'm going to run away from fairly quickly.
Okay.
If the organization is not ready to say we need to do something, then I think all the sales tools, techniques in the world might get you the engagement, but based upon my own personal experience, it's going to be an unhappy engagement.
Right.
Yeah, I would reiterate that fact that what Bill just talked about. I mean, for the most part, DE Inc. isn't in the project management business. We're in the business of helping entrepreneurial organizations to make the transition to a professionally managed organization. And typically what's causing that causes organizations not to be able to do that is the owner of the small business, because they're not willing to change. And so when we go into organizations, that's the first thing that we assess. At the top level, if this isn't something that they buy into, then there's nothing that I can say that's going to change their mind at that point. They have to have reached that point where they realize that something needs to change in the organization, and they're not pointing fingers at others. They realize they themselves have to change as well as others within the organization. So if you run into that from this perspective as well, there's nothing you're going to do in order to change that mindset. So the mindset almost has to be there. It almost gets more into a selling process and asking the right questions to qualify to determine whether someone is at that point that they're ready to do that. Because if they're not, like Bill said, you're not going to do. There's nothing you can do to convince them of the fact that they have to change. They're going to have to make that assessment themselves.
What does an assessor need to do to keep their credentials? Do the assessor credentials age?
Yes, there is intended to be a review of the assessors. So and the timing of that we don't know yet. Again, I think to the point that we want to keep it to be meaningful, I think it could be annual, it could be biannual as well. So there's a lot that we don't know yet about how assessors will work and what makes for the most effective RA process.
One more question here. I think this is the last one now. If an organization does not qualify for certification, does the RA provide a roadmap of improvement recommendations? Is there a reassessment scheduled usually then? How does that work?
There's not really a standard method. We don't really dictate anything from that perspective. This goes back to what Tim had mentioned earlier in terms of we tried to make this as simple and as open as possible for those. I think most organizations would expect that somebody would at least outline what the things are that need to be accomplished in order to become certified at that particular point. And then it's up to the RA whether or not they want to engage their organization, their company with that organization to help them to get through that process, or if they have the capabilities or not to be able to do that. But if not, obviously, there, part of being an RA is being a part of that network. So there's probably someone within the network that has the capability to assist if the RA can't really help that organization to get through that process as well. So I don't know if Bill or Tim would like to add any of that.
Yeah, well, one of the things we discussed during the development of the standard was how much control to exercise over the RAs, and did we want to view them as independents or as arms of ASAPM. And in this area, we definitely view the RAs as independent. There is no reason why 2 or 3 RAs couldn't compete for the same assessment, with the expectation that if the organization didn't pass, they would be first in line to provide the assistance to helping that organization improve. And in fact, if I were proposing to an organization, that would certainly be one of the things that I personally would feature in my proposal as an indication of how I might be able to assist if they were judged unable to provide adequate evidence of competence. I expect that many of the initial users of aPRO will be organizations at the extremes of ability. They will be organizations that know they do a good job managing their projects and are looking for certification so that they can get an independent assessment of what they already know. And then I also expect a lot of the people in the bottom of the barrel who are saying, we know we're awful, we know we need to get better, and because this is basically cheap and easy and straightforward and public and open, we'd like to use the aPRO model as a way to help us identify where we should improve, and they would be specifically looking for an assessment organization that could help them get better.
Thanks to everybody for participating. Thanks to all the participants who dialed in. This will be available in a podcast format in a few days, and I believe that will be posted on the ASAPM website shortly.
Hi, too. This is Tim Jaques. Just on behalf of ASAPM, thanks everybody for tuning in here. We look forward to seeing you and hearing from you on July 3rd at 3 p.m. And look forward to more questions from you on aPRO. Have a great afternoon.
Take care, everybody.